5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the show of the hour, D2M. Is it the age of declining music? My name is Pete, and I have my co-host Gus here.
Yes, I'm Gus. Let's go.
All right. Well, we're going to stick to the usual format in basics, as we are going to take a tour with one of our tracks. But before we go to that, have a few things to address. First of all, that you might have been noticed that this show has been on a shorter break because we had some technical difficulties to sort out. But now we are back on the grind, hopefully, and we are going to keep pumping out content. Second of all, that the third installment of Side Project will come soon, so stay tuned for that. Anything from you, Gus, to say before we get into a discussion?
No, I'm excited and ready to see what we have on the table today for our listeners. All right, thank you, Pete, for your wonderful track. Now, the first thing I would like to say about this is kind of like what I imagined, what I kind of felt like when I heard it. It kind of gives this kind of space vibe, kind of like a space dream, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, imagine you're like floating in a space cruiser, looking out through a massive window out into the stars. And then, and that's like as you listen to the track, and then as this percussion comes towards the end, around like 1:19, there's like this part where it builds up, and that's where I kind of imagine where like I'm looking into the space, and then I see some object coming towards me. You know, that's the percussion.
Yep.
And then I'm wondering, okay, what's gonna happen? What is it? What could this be?
Okay, so you saying basically you could imagine this as in the soundtrack of a space movie?
I guess kind of, because I guess that's kind of a vibe that it gives. I guess it's a bit like, you know, the style of the type of sound that you gave to the instruments kind of reminds me almost a bit of the David Bowie kind of Space Oddity sounds a little
No,
bit.
I haven't thought of that, but actually now you say that it's quite cool. Maybe I should rename it to, well, not Space Odyssey, but something spacey instead of Road Ahead. And
The
what do you think of
cruise,
it?
the cruise in the stars. Well,
Cruise and Star.
and here's what I was leading up to is that you have this percussion coming in towards you,
Yep.
and you think that, oh, what could this uh, amazing object be? But then you realize that it's, instead of being like a star, it's a rock. Oh my god! I was hoping there would be something extra after the percussion, because at 119 the percussion builds up after this first part, which I really like. But then, and I expect as percussion builds up that there's gonna like be some kind of change in the track, that it like
Mm-hmm.
builds up to something, but it kind of stays the same until it goes up a little bit later after that. So I would have wished at 119 that it led up to something more. But otherwise, I quite liked it.
Okay. Nice.
Um, but I want to ask you, what was like? Did you have an underlying goal when you made the piece?
Underlying goal. Well, not underlying goal, but I was watching a couple of movies at that time. I made this piece quite early on when I started composing instrumentals and stuff like that. And I have a singer in the country where I'm from. We have a singer, one of the most popular pop musicians, and he was born in the, or he grew up in the 80s, right? And he uses a lot of synth sounds. And this piece was inspired by one of his songs that actually is about. Uh, that's why I named it Road Ahead. And the piece that I got inspired by is, well, I don't know if I can translate it, but it's basically that's what we were. That's the closest translation I can give you, and it's basically about change as you move on from something and you get into a different state in your life. You know, the song that this piece was inspired by is usually played at graduations in either high schools or primary schools, because
Mm.
there is a tradition, at least in the school where I went before high school, was the graduating class was going across the whole school into every classroom and sort of take a tour in the whole school, and then the end of the whole uh, tour, you got to the assembly, like to the gym where the assembly was held.
Mm.
And while they were making this tour, that song, that's what we were was playing, and that's what I wanted to sort of do with this. That's why you probably had that spacey vibe. It wasn't space that inspired me. It was that you move on, that figurative space of moving on into another space, another stage of your life, from, let's say, high school to college, or from primary school to high school. And I guess if at 119 where you have that change but it actually stays the same, that build up is because everyone, once you get towards graduation, right? Like, if you remember, when you graduate high school, everyone's like anxious and, okay, what's going to be the next thing? um and I guess the anticipation, once somebody is going on from life to another, or from one stage of their life to another, the anticipation is always, and the nervousness is always bigger than it actually should be, because it's basically you're doing a similar thing uh, until you're in school, right?
Mm.
That's why it didn't build up to anywhere. Because if you, let's say, let's use the analogy of moving on from high school to college. Once you get to your exams and you're sort of, okay, this is the exam part, and now I'm going to graduate. This is the big ladder life and stuff like that. But then you realize once you get into college that it's not that much of a difference. You're still with your friends, or you make new friends. The anticipation is at the begin or at the end. The big change is when you're out of college and boom, you're faced with the brutal reality of life. You know that now everything is on you basically, and not up to your teachers or not up to your parents. So if you mess up, you need to get back up. So I guess that's what that fake build up was, or that's what I wanted to do with the. And it's the same thing. If you realize the first drum fill, where it actually introduced the main beat, the first drum fill is the same as I used the same drum fill the second time, and it's the same thing with okay, there's a build up, there's an anticipation, but you basically there's not much of a big change until the very end, where life actually throws stuff at you, and okay, now is the real thing that you have to prove to yourself and to others that you actually can do this. Because in life, once you get out of school, you have one chance. You mess up, it's very hard to get up. It's possible, but it's something to be, it's something to think about. So that was no underlying goal, but that's what the inspiration was.
But you certainly had a vision for your inspiration.
If I would need to like say it in one word, it's probably change that inspired me. Because at that time I was graduating from high school, and I was dealing with some personal issues and stuff like that. But I realized that it was, all that turmoil and stuff like that, it's gonna get better.
Yeah, I liked that description, that inspiration. It's a really cool analogy. Yeah.
A lot of the pieces that I compose are not inspired by concrete things, or not or certain like tangible things, but it's more thoughts or feelings that you get inspired. Because if you remember, until now I was composing instrumentals, which doesn't force you the opportunity of telling a story. If you're writing a song with a lyric and stuff like that, you have boundaries. You have to compose it within limits, within structure, and you have to tell a story with the lyrics. When you're composing an instrumental, all you have is sounds. You don't have words. So you have to get the mood right. You have to get the build-ups right, or the downfall. If you're going from a really big sound to a low wind down ending. So it's really about how you feel, or how you think the sound will make you feel of that instrumental or that piece. And that's why when I name an instrumental, it's not as easy as naming a song with a lyric, because that has always a story. Now, telling a story with only sounds is only possible if we take a look at how those certain sounds make you feel, or what it makes you think of, and then the overall vibe of that piece is what gives you the title. It's interesting. It's interesting how you can compose an instrumental or write a whole song, and it's a totally different process, even though they stem from the same thing.
But I mean, when you write a lyrical song, you don't necessarily have to be bound by the rules.
Well, it depends what rules are we talking about. obviously if you write a song with lyric, um, then you have the rules of song structure, you know, because if you go away from that, then you have a little bit of a problem.
Mm.
And there are certain, I'm not saying it's rules, but there are unwritten things that songwriters usually uh, follow in order for it to be consistent. Because with an instrumental piece, you have more freedom to introduce more sounds and more the instruments. But if you have a song, then you have a it's usually written for a band or for a singer with a backup band that is composed of X, musicians playing X number of instruments. So you're limited by the number of instruments, or you're limited by what story you want to tell and how long. Because remember, when in the early days of music, when it was beginning to raise as a pleasure piece, you had songs of, I don't know, 7, 9 minutes, 7, 8, 9 minutes long, and the average song length nowadays becomes to 2, 3 minutes. If you have a 5 minute song, that usually is considered long, right? So you are limited to the shortened attention span of the average listener today, and these unwritten limits. It's not really rules, because no one is telling you, okay, you can do only this or that, because music is about breaking rules.
Mm.
But that's what I was meaning by the rules or limits, if you will.
Right. But do you think that a song without like the proper structure of like chorus, verse, bridge could make it today?
It depends in what context, because in, let's look at popular music, pop music today. It have a hard time making it, in my humble opinion. But if you look at a soundtrack for a movie, like if you look at Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, the soundtrack of that is not really it's those are instrumental string arrangements, and they are there to emphasize a certain feeling or a certain mood of a scene. So that doesn't have a story, that doesn't have a lyric, that's more than 3, 5 minutes, because it spans through the whole movie, which is 2, 3 hours. Now, obviously, the soundtrack is chopped up into pieces, and the certain movies have certain soundtracks that are named after the part of the story that they are used in a movie. So yes, a song without a lyric or without a story can make it, but it depends what type of instrumental piece it is, um, and in what context are we talking about making it in.
All right. Okay. Mm. Well,
But I mean, down in the comments, guys, on the other side of the internet, it would be cool to see your ideas about the tracks that we showcase in these episodes. Uh, if this is your first time hearing this show, then go down in the comments and put your thoughts about this down. Or you go back to any of our other videos that are up on the channel, Discovery to Music on YouTube, and see what you think about those. Just a suggestion to make this a little bit more interactive than us just discussing stuff. What do you
yes.
think about that, Gustav?
Yeah, it would be much appreciated. We always need some feedback.
Yeah, feedback. One thing that I would like to ask anybody or everybody is that keep trashing people, either us or each other in the comments away, because we want this to be a happy community, even though we are small. I mean, I am looking at our channel page at the moment and we have 3 subscribers. Way to go. you know,
Making
but
progress.
hey, hopefully you guys can relate to us, and hopefully this video and this channel reaches people who like music and discussing music, and we can make this into a community where we have as much positivity as possible, obviously without living life in a rosy and pink cloud, because we don't want to be delusional. Obviously, if we are struggling with something, or you know, have something to say to you guys that might be a little bit negative, we will be as transparent as we can with you guys. But negativity, I'm not a fan of. I don't know about you, Gustav, but I would like
Oh,
this channel to be as positive and as uplifting
yeah.
as it can be.
And I mean, but also don't like make sure. I mean, if you give criticism, don't just be negative about it. Be like constructive. Give it like some. Don't say it just that it's bad. Say like, what can you do to improve? Or say like, well, I didn't like this part. Maybe do this or something. But
Exactly. I mean, we don't mind if you don't like our stuff. That's completely fine. You're free to have your own opinion. But then please give us some constructive constructive criticism on how, or if you're gonna make it criticism to anybody, either to us or to anybody in down in the comment sections. Once this channel reaches more people, we would love you. We would love to have you on board and have a good following with people who like music in general.
all right. But first, we need to start and go with our discussion for the day, and that is the whether music has declined over the years or if it's still pretty prime.
All right. So next time or next segment, we're gonna have a longer discussion. Hopefully, your guys' ideas are going to be down in the comments as well. We'll be back.
All right, now for our second segment of the day, uh, the decline of music. Pete, would you agree or disagree? What do you think?
Well,
Has there been a
well,
decline in the quality of music over the year, or has there not been? What would
well.
you say?
That's what we have started our episode with. Is it the decline? Is it the age of declining music? Because honestly, a lot of people, there's a lot of argument going around that some people say that yes, it is the decline of music. Some people say no, it's not the decline of music. If you look at any music channel up on YouTube, they are reminiscing the old days, or the recent old days, like the beginning of 2000s. Even though,
Mm.
oh, by the way, Happy New Year to anybody. This is 2020. Hope you guys have a great New Year. But yeah, so basically, is it the age of declining music? I think it's very subjective as to what we say is declining, what we say is not. We are not scientists to, um, to determine that. All I can say is that music is changing. That's for sure. Somewhat for the better, somewhat for the worse. Um, but I don't necessarily think it's declining. It's just a big change in how people perceive music, how the music
Mm.
industry perceives performers and artists. It's interesting, that's for sure. What do you think?
Yeah, I would also agree that it's a very subjective. Um, like it's like it depends a lot from what perspective you're looking at it from too. And I think it's very easy for people to be biased. One thing due to their music choice, like what they prefer. For example, I myself, I do like a lot of like nostalgic music. I do listen to a lot of older music simply because I personally I really enjoy them and I have a lot of memories with them. But at the same time, though, and I guess I do have I sometimes I do think to myself, well, the music nowadays it it's like I generalize to myself sometimes. Like I would say, oh well, it's just that same like harsh like bass or drums or percussion like doof, doof, doof. but but other times I feel like the music that we make today is just so enjoyable. Like I find it so cool what they do, what people can do with music today. And I think as an art form, it's kind of hard to just like say with a concrete like measurement. Oh yeah, this art sucks because we have a ruler that can measure whether it's good or not. But you can't really because it's art and it's very subjective and it's biased and you have all kinds of perspectives on it, and it depends on the context, you know.
True. Depends on the genre, depends on the context, and depends on the artist. You know, because I mean, let's look at the Beatles. They've recorded on Abbey Road Studios. They've recorded one of a lot of people say one of the most successful albums of all time. You know, and they had songs on there that used, I believe, a 40-piece orchestra plus the four band members playing their usual instruments on the top, which is a filled up track, obviously, and it's a whole lot of stuff to listen to and mix and stuff like that. But in contrast, we have songs like Young, Dumb, and Broke, which came out recently a few years ago. I can't remember if it was on the beginning of 2019 or the end of 2018, but that song instrumentally is not as complex as some old songs, but it's a very good song. It
Hmm.
has a great lyrics. It is a catchy song, nonetheless. Um, and the guy singing it is I mean, it's not a technical singer. He doesn't do a lot of, you know, bending notes and jumping from one note to another with the
Hmm.
scales and intonation stuff like that. So it got simplified. All right. Some people would call that declined, obviously, because it doesn't use as much technicality, it doesn't use as much instrumentation. But personally, I wouldn't call that declining music because it's still up on the charts. People still love it, and they sort of, I mean, still listen to it. Even me, who is not, that's not the first genre of music that I uh, gravitate towards. When I heard that song in particular, I was like, yeah, even though it's a simple piece, you know, because if you take away the vocals and you listen to the instrumentation of it, what it uses is a couple of pads, synth pads, and a beat, and a couple of changes with chords, but over the top, the vocals make it into a piece that is still enjoyable and it's easier to listen to because
Hmm.
your your brain and your ear doesn't get crowded uh, with all the instruments of the old days.
Well,
However, if you grew up listening to something from 80s or 70s or 60s even, uh, there was definitely a change in music over the years.
yeah.
Uh, but again, declining music, I don't think it's declining, except for one um, sort of subgenre, which is or actually, it starts with a big genre, which is house music. You
Yeah.
know that it changed so much that For example, if you look at a lot of house music bass sounds, they are not the most sophisticated bass sounds. Okay, so
Right.
when you have a rackety washing machine
Mm.
and let's say it makes some weird noises, or you have it's so weird. One of the days earlier this week, I've stumbled across, don't ask me how, but a video with MRI sounds in it. Right? What does an MRI scanner make? A medical MRI, and let me tell you, that machine is a heck of a noisemaker. And there
Sheesh.
was a comment on there that uh, the MRI scanners made dubstep sounds before it was a thing, you know. And
Doctor House.
to me that showed that it wasn't anything what we would call musical. It was just noise, but people started using those noises with harsh synth sounds and really thumping drums and stuff like that. But on the other hand, I mean, yes, if I'm in the mood for that, sometimes I'll listen to that. So it is not that declining it. That's, I mean, I don't want to stigmatize, that type of music because, there are older people that go,
Mm.
that's not music. That doesn't have a rhythm. That doesn't have
Yeah.
a melody. That doesn't have anything. It's just noise put together.
Right.
But it takes a certain artistry to take noises that are absolutely not musical in their conventional ways, and use them to make something that they can blast at parties, or blast, or somebody who makes an instrumental, and then a DJ goes and takes that and makes it into a dance remix. I think that even needs some artistry, and that's why I can applaud DJs.
Mm.
A lot of people say that, I've heard people say that DJs aren't real musicians, because they are not playing instruments, they are standing behind the desk pushing
Mm.
buttons. But in fact, that's not what well, from the outside looking in, that's probably what they do, but there's a lot going into DJing
Mm.
that goes behind that actually involves um, a lot of musical theory and some stuff that actually um, that there's a lot going behind the scenes that you don't see, because to do a great remix that people can enjoy at a party or at a music festival takes a lot of knowledge of music, uh, even if it's not an instrument, but rather music theory, how to count beats, how to match keys, I mean, keys of songs, how to match tempos of songs so that if you mix them together, they sound good and they sound enjoyable.
Mm.
So electronic music of today, even though some people say, I've heard a lot of people say that uh, that's the genre that declines the most because of this very thing that they use sounds that are not made for music specifically. But again, if you are a composer or an arranger or a DJ that uses these and it makes dance remixes that then can make money with at a club
Mm.
DJing for somebody or at a music festival, there is definitely a market for that. So in short, I don't think that music is declining. It is changing,
Yeah.
that's for sure, and it becomes more and more futuristic as technology and sample pads and loopers and stuff like that come into
Mm.
play more and more. Um, but it gives people that cannot play a physical instrument a chance to tap into the world of music. And
Yeah.
if they have the love for it and the interest for it, they can learn to be a DJ. They can learn to be a music producer. They
Mm.
can learn to be somebody in the music industry that not necessarily playing a music or an instrument rather,
Mm.
but they can take their part in it. What's your opinion on this? Is it the age of declining music?
Well, I thought it was like how you said how people can like, for example, with MRI scans. Like I love how creative people can be with just like sampling sounds from every day and then turning that into music. Like that's some of the most like creative work out there.
And it takes
Like
a lot of guts and a
yeah,
lot of artistry as to, to recognize what sounds work with what.
yeah, and then just to like be able to manipulate that in a program, like oh my god, that's really cool. And like make an entire song based on just like that sound and changing it, the tone. Oh my god. But back to the MRI scan, I keep getting this image of like a doctor putting a patient into the MRI scan, and then it's like depending on the results, there's like a different sound coming from the MRI scan.
Imagine a doctor being a DJ.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, I know. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. That that comment on that video has cracked me up because and it made me think like, okay, dubstep is an electronic music genre that uses a very harsh bass, a very harsh synth, and very thumping drums. Uh, and the dynamic range and the whole technical part of it is very different to, let's say, a Beatles song or something. Granted, they are different genres, but they are popular music nonetheless because a lot of people are into rap, are into dance music, are into house music these days, and they are these genres are the most listened to, whether you go to clubs, whether you go to concert, whether you go to wherever, right? And again, as you said, to make something out of nothing in terms of make enjoyable music out of sounds, today we have one of the things that I love is a cappella music. And there is an artist up on YouTube called, I think he's called Mike Tompkins, who is a cappella musician. And what he does is uses layering and multi-tracking and using sounds with his own mouth to make songs sound like they are made like they're using instruments, even though it's all 100% vocals. There is I'm sure everybody's heard of it, someone called Bobby McFerrin, who is a singer, conductor, and a jazz musician. And one of his favorite songs, or one of his most famous songs, rather, I don't know if it's a favorite, but one of his most famous songs called Don't Worry, Be Happy became popular because of that thing, because of the fact that he wasn't using any instruments, but rather layering and multi-tracking his own voice in different heights and using different vocal techniques. Or there is a song of his called Drive, which really fascinated me. It doesn't have a lot of lyrics. It has some. But what he uses in that is a singing technique called polyphonic singing. And yes, and if you are familiar with that, it basically is based on the idea that when you sing a note, a singer sings a note. A single note is it's not that single note that you hear, but rather a bunch of notes that make up that note. Meaning that if you were to deconstruct that single note, let's say you have a C note, right, that a singer sings. If you were to deconstruct that note, you would have a fundamental and what you would have what's called an overtone. And there are singers, I'm sorry, who, if you know how to sing polyphonically, they can deconstruct those notes and they can move the fundamental or the overtone independent from each other, and that can get you a very unique singing style that's almost unhuman like.
Sounds like magic.
It's
Wow.
not magic, but it always fascinates me that
Yeah.
everybody has the same stuff, and that's why I like Bobby McFerrin as a singer, is because when he was working on his technique, one of his technique was, I heard him in an interview saying that one of his technique, or one of the things that he was working on when he was working on his technique, was he was interested in how the human uh, languages sound rather than instruments. So he didn't set out to sound like a certain instrument. Let's say today he's going to sound like an oboe, tomorrow a trumpet, but rather listen to the Italian speak, listen to the French speak, listen to the German speak, listen to the Swedish speak, you know? Um, Everybody, no matter what language you speak, has got the same stuff, the same exact voice box, but the amount of sounds that can or cannot make, depending on what culture you're in, is enormous. I mean, try uh, an American, or try telling an American or a European to play the didgeridoo in a way that is needs to be played, right? It's the Australian who really can play the didgeridoo because it's their native instrument, and their uh, technique of playing that instrument requires a specific uh, or their way of playing that instrument requires a certain technique that they have perfected because of their language, because of their culture, right? That's
Mm.
why if let's say an American tries to talk German, it's really hard for them because what's in German, what you have a lot is what's called a throat sound that really
Right.
come from deep down the throat. And if your voice box is not really accustomed to that, your body is not uh, capable of making that sound as authentic as an authentic German would, you know? So to be singing and to be playing a different instrument, it always fascinated me that with the same stuff, the same type of voice box, no matter the culture, it really is an interesting thing what you can and cannot do depending on where you live. And if you listen to Bobby McFerrin, that's what he describes, that if you learn or if you listen to the languages rather than instruments, as a singer, you have a more chance of improving your technique rather than listening to music itself.
Mm. But an interesting point about the fact that you can do the same instrument but get a different result because because of your heritage. Um, I think that has a lot to do with how babies, when they're very, at least babies, children, at a very young age, um, they have this thing where they develop they develop a certain way to speak. At first, they have a very wide range of tones that they can do. For example,
Mhm.
if you took, I think there was a study that took like American children and Japanese children, and then they saw like how much their tones started to disperse or separate. Like the difference started, how big the difference started to grow once they got older. That's because um, they because their voices or the tones that uh, they adjusted because or they because As they learned the language of their heritage, their tone started narrowing down on the optimal like range for them to speak that language.
Yeah, because they are
So
how a baby learns to speak is basically, copy their parents.
yeah,
And
exactly.
if their parents speak a certain range because that's what they speak, then that's what a child's gonna uh, learn, right? It's the same thing that if you take, let's say, an American dog and a German dog, it's weird, but they can understand the different languages because the common word, what they use as a command for them to sit or to stay. Okay, if you take a dog that's owned by a German person, then that dog won't understand the word sit or stay. Ergo, they can sort of differentiate between languages, or at least tonal qualities of what they are supposed to do to what word, right? Because a German dog never heard the word stay or sit. They heard, the German versions of those. So the certain tones that their owners talk or speak to them, that's what they grow accustomed to. And the same thing with a singer or with a baby is that as you grow, your voice box doesn't get. I mean, it has the capability to make all those noise, but the improvement of your brain just makes it almost impossible because that's not what you're exposed to on a daily basis.
Right.
And that's why some singers or let's say music in general is unique, and that's why I don't think that generalizing that much that it's a decline of music or the age of declining music. I think it just gets more unique and more differentiated. What bogs me though is the music industry side of things, how they record songs and how they produce songs from a producer standpoint, right? To make money out of it. What do you think of that part?
Well,
or should I tell first what I think, and then you can chime in on that?
Sure.
Because no, because if you look at the music industry today, what they do and what I've heard a couple of singers and artists say is that they try to homogenize the the songs, popular songs. I've heard people say that when they flick through the radio, the songs sound more and more similar to each other, right? And that's because when a music producer takes a track, they make it in a way where the compression and the dynamic range and all the technical details are so similar because of the fact that the simplification of music is happening. Okay, so if we are talking about declining music, I wouldn't say declining, but rather simplifying it in lyric form and in musical form. Because what do pop musicians use today as instrumentations? Do you have any idea?
You tell me.
Well, they use drums, samples, synth, and barely native instruments, or barely violins, or barely cellos, or barely trumpets. There are older artists who are still active who do use that stuff, just like the Beatles were. or just like if you take Stevie Wonder, he uses synths, but there's a lot of uh, horns. There's a lot of guitar that pop music doesn't use that much. Popular music today is based on synthesizers and samplers, whether it's drum samples or whether it's synth samples, pads, leads,
Right.
plucking sounds. And the fact that almost all of the popular music is based on those instruments, meaning that the sound of these tracks are similar. So the way uh, producers try to differentiate between them is compress them and make them get louder. So the dynamic range, they compress the dynamic range down so that the difference between the loudest part and the quietest part is not as prominent as, for example, something from 70s or 60s when the rock and roll was emerging, right? Something like the instrumentation and the whole technicality of a, let's say, Buddy Holly song to a, I know it's a far-fetched analogy, but to a Lady Gaga song is completely different. Obviously,
Right.
the genre is different, but beyond that, the instrumentation different and the technicality, not because of the, or partly because of the improvement of the recording technology and the fact that today most artists record digitally, and it is a sort of a unique thing if somebody goes analog. So the producers are trying to homogenize songs, uh, and why? It's because it's because of the familiarity. If it's something sounds familiar, there is a bigger chance that people will like it, and that means that there is a lower risk of failing with that song or with that artist, right? Which
Right.
means, I mean, music labels and music producers, what they concentrate on is making money. A lot of artists are uh, pissed at the music industry today because they are getting screwed over. Because touring and making albums to nowadays, that the music industry is focused on streaming and file sharing and all that, is make it easier for consumers to get to music or to a certain track, and music artists don't make as much money from selling albums or selling singles as they were back in the 80s, right? Or before times. So now, to make up for that loss, what the music or what the music labels do is they cut away from touring, cut away from merchandise. So what the artist is actually left with is basically none. Is very little to what they
Okay.
should have been getting as a credit for their art, right? But back to the homogen, this cutting, and what this brings us to is that all artists or a lot of artists get to the point where it's very cookie cutter formulaic. uh, Music production is what's happening today. The uniqueness and the differences between an artist to artist B and artist A are not as prominent because everyone is trying to make money, and it's concentrated on money making rather than the artistry itself, in my opinion. You know,
So you think that the quest for money is having an effect on the art form?
yes, yes, definitely, definitely. If you look at, I mean, I'm no music professional, but if you look at interviews with artists, maybe who have started in the 80s and are still active today, so they have a comparison between the two, they will tell you that they are sort of dumbfounded in the sense that nowadays if you want to make money in the music industry, it's not because of the art that they get the money from, but it's the what I'm trying to say is if you get somebody who worked in the 80s, they started for the music, right? And they made albums and they made a whole record, and they went with that record, they went to a record store who then sold it. So it went into retail. And the people, if you wanted to, as a consumer, if you wanted to listen to a band or a certain song, you had to go to a record store. You had to flip through the records. You had to find the one that you were looking for, or either you bought the whole album or that one single, and then probably you destroyed that by listening it so much, because that was the only way that you could get to that song conventionally, right? But as time went on, what changed is that Spotify, Deezer, Amazon Music, Apple Music came into play, and all these online platforms where people are selling um, their music, or let's say Mixcloud, where it's the same thing as DJs. So if you're a DJ and you want to sell your stuff, you can go Mixcloud and do it that way. And this online streaming like Spotify makes it harder for artists to control where their music is going. Because let's say somebody buys a single, right? They pay it for it once, but then once they have it, they download it, they copy it, and they sort of file share it with their friends, with their colleagues, with whoever. But those copies are not paid for. They are sort of pirated copies of, just like they did it, pirate DVDs and stuff like that, right? And
Right.
I guess that's what sort of bothers artists, is that pirating their music and giving their music away for free, is that this online community, because of this online community and this online music sharing, they have less control over how much money they make on their music, that where does that money go, and how much money does the record label gets for that album or for that single, and how much money is taken away from their touring and their merchandise by the label to make up for that loss that they don't get from the decrease of, let's say, records, uh, s- selling records. Because I mean, there are a couple of artists who are still not on Spotify. Now, I'm not going to be able to sort of name you artists, but I've heard a couple of people say that they are not on Spotify for that reason, because they want to have as much control as they can, and they don't want to give away their music for free or lose money because of the lose money from their touring or their merchandise, because that's where the label cuts away a lot from, to make up for the loss of money from the decreased number of record sales. So yes, I think, to get back to your question, do I think that the money making is taking away from the art? Absolutely. I think that should be a little bit controlled a little bit more, and put some more emphasis on the uniqueness and the artistry of making music, in all genres, actually.
Right, but then for that to happen, the artists need a reliable income.
Yes, and that goes back to, um, all the platforms, the file platforms, the file sharing and the streaming platforms, because the artist and the file sharing platform have to have some kind of an agreement, or that's that part of the industry has to work up something so that the artist doesn't get screwed over and the label doesn't have to take away money from elsewhere. Because earlier on, like, before modern days, quote unquote, where did the artists get the money from? Part from the record sales, but mostly from touring and from the merchandise, right? And because most of the money from the record went to the record label. Now, what's happening is there's some money going from the record or the singles that they make, but because that they don't make as much money on those as back in the 80s, they need to make up for that, right? And where they take away from, where they can, touring and merchandise. So eventually what the artists are left with is a fraction of what they should be left with.
Okay.
But that's the music industry part, but the music itself, I don't know. I don't think we could call it the age of declining music. It's just change in music, what I would call it, the age of change in music. Obviously, there are these problems that need to be figured out and solved.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that we haven't touched on is all the showbiz stuff that goes on with X Factor, with BGT, with AGT, and all these shows that from one part are good and one part are bad. What do you think of these? What's your opinion on these shows?
Well,
in terms of music or the music industry,
I don't know how good they are for the I mean, I don't know how good they are for breaking out like new people into the industry. Like, I mean, for example, here in Sweden, you would have like this Swedish Idol, and then someone would win, and then they would get like a record with their winning track, and then maybe they would get signed deals, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll break out into the industry. And from like all I can really give is a viewer's point of view, and I feel like I mean, I kind of find it enjoyable at times, but also it doesn't enable too much creativity sometimes. Although that does depend. Like, sometimes you get to see artists take on covers of songs in an interesting way. But usually they do have to. But the sad thing is that they usually have to take very well-known songs. So you kind of hear the same thing as you have heard before. It's just sung by a different person, and not usually as good because they're just developing their career.
It's interesting because what I see, and I know it's going to be a little bit boring for me to talk about the music industry so much, but again, what I've heard, or what I see, by the way, I haven't heard this, but one of the interesting things is that there is too many of these, I think, of these shows, because think about it. Every year there's an X Factor. Almost every year there's some type of AGT or BGT or whatever, or an idol, whether it's in America, whether it's in Sweden, whether it's wherever it is, right? And what I've seen over the years is that it doesn't allow for space for the artists. And what I mean by that is what these shows are good for is showing people what they are capable of reaching, as in if they work hard. But I've heard an analogy once that what these shows do is they take people who are not experienced in the music industry enough, they don't have uh, enough experience, and they are like a bird, right? They are like a baby bird who just got out of the egg, and they put them into the canon of show business, put them through the canon of this let's say X Factor, right? They shoot them out to the public, shoot them up where the stardom is. They show them where the stardom is. But once the show ends and they start to fall, if they cannot find their way of staying up, ergo they cannot find, using the analogy, if they cannot learn to fly while they are being uh, dropped, while they are being while they are falling, they are gonna face plummet and basically end up where they started. So their quote unquote musical career is like a hill. So they got shot up, go through the show, and once the show ends and they are not mentored by people who have experience anymore on a regular basis, they sort of face plummet back to where they are started.
Right, unless
Right?
they're really good.
Unless they're really good and learn to quote unquote fly and find their way to stay up above water. Because sure, there are artists like Harry Styles who got through, X Factor, I think it was, and he is still an A-lister pop musician today, right? But anybody who, like, for example, if you look at Jay Smith, who was a Swedish Idol winner on one of the years,
Yeah.
he did make records, or one or two, and he made great covers of popular songs, like a Prayer from Madonna, or Bad Romance from Lady Gaga, or songs from A-listers, but he is not on the surface. You don't hear from him much. You only hear from him if you really look for him. So he's not um, what I would say the A-lister type musician. He's very, I would say, underground, despite the fact that he won one of these shows. So in my opinion, he's one of those guys who actually didn't find his way to fly, and he face plummeted to a certain point. Whereas if you take Harry Styles, he began in a group, right? He began in One Direction, then he went solo, he found his way, and he made his luck. He still tours, and he is, I would say, an A-lister singer. A lot of people, I don't listen to him personally, but I think that guy has very good talent, and he's where he is because he knows something, or he has a team behind him that knows something, how to keep him above water.
But and how do you feel that loops back around to the decline of music?
Well, it doesn't go back to the decline in music in per se, but what it goes back to is it goes back to the artists, because it doesn't get enough space to the artists to develop themselves, because within a year a beginner artist won't establish a place in the industry so that he can continue on. Only in very rare cases. Most of these guys cannot establish uh, a presence, a good enough presence, so that they can make a living out of music or touring. They might have one or two gigs here and there, but they are not up where they should be, because it's a very fast dumping of new quote unquote talents, right? Because every year there is a new one, and what that means is for a year you're the star who made it in that year's show, But the next year, if you haven't established yourself in that 1 year, you're forgotten because the industry and the public already concentrates on the next generation,
Right.
right? While artists in, let's say, back in the 80s, where they were going from garage bands to clubs to theaters to venue, and they grew in size, that took over, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 years by the time they got to the point where artists who go on these shows today should be within a year. It's too short of a time. One
Mm.
year, let's say, is not enough for them to establish their place. It takes
Right.
a minimum of, I would say, 5 years at least, because within 5 years they they will play enough, because a lot of bands who are like world stars today, what they've done is they played every backyard, they played every tavern, they played every club, they played every theater, and they've gained experience how to handle the crowd, how to
Mm.
handle the business, how to handle the pressure. And these guys who go on these shows take a shortcut, but that shortcut might get them to fame, but it doesn't get them the experience to handle that fame and
Right.
handle the amount of money that gets handed to them and the amount of power that gets handed to them and the amount of responsibility that gets handed to them.
Mm.
And in a short time, what they will do is they will do self-destructive things. They will either turn to drugs or drinking, or they make scenes all over the place and stuff like that. I don't want to bash Justin Bieber because the guy probably knows something. That's why he made it in his teen years. The guy was discovered on YouTube, right? The
Mm.
industry actually made a big deal, but the guy was too young. His problem wasn't the shortness of time, but his problem was uh, the fact that he got discovered and so popular so young
Right. It wasn't
that,
mature enough
that
for
when
it.
he made it to multimillionaire in that age, he didn't have the experience and he didn't have the the power needed to handle fame, to handle the
Mm.
power of money that he was given to. It's like giving a kid or giving the key to a kid to the kingdom. It's too much, right?
Right.
And now he is such a poor guy. I mean, I have sympathy for him because what he's doing now, he is, you know, he's drawn himself back. He got married a few months ago, and now he's trying to sort his life out. He said he's dealing with some mental, issues. And why is that? Probably because he had a a lot of turmoil, um, a lot of stress in the years where he couldn't handle it, and he has
Mm.
to sort of sort himself out. I mean, I don't listen to him on a daily basis, but I know who he is. I
Mm.
know what he's dealing with, or parts of what he's dealing with. And I mean, he knows something, but the fact that there's this lot of dumping and you have to make it within a year, there's too much pressure on these guys. To make something that is going to last the test of time, it takes years. It doesn't take
Yeah. Yeah.
12 months. It doesn't take 14 months. It doesn't take 24 months. It takes, as I said, minimum 5 years. And the
Yeah.
fact that every year there's a different one, and every year there's a new one that the public and the industry is concentrating on doesn't give enough experience and enough time for these young artists to 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 experience enough so that they can actually establish their place and they can
So
keep their heads above water on their own without being mentored.
so basically, what the industry is doing, if I'm trying to do an analogy here, is that they're grabbing. Let's say they go to the lottery, and then they grab a startup musician, singer, star, and then they start scraping away, and they see, is it gonna be a winner? And then they see if it's a winner, and then they either succeed or they go into the trash.
Yes, because if they don't make it within that 1 year with hit records, they are thrown away basically, and they don't have anyone to go to. And you know, once you go to that, some people might go into depression, some people might deal with stuff that is I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great to be famous because you can help people, you have a certain responsibility to carry yourself a certain way, you have stuff, you have a say in things to a certain extent, but the fact that there's too much pressure on too young kids or people who are not kids but don't have the experience, I don't think that will, in the long haul, help the industry or help the artists, singles, bands, whoever we're talking about in the long haul. So, yes, the industry is changing, definitely. The quality of music, I don't think it's declining. It's very subjective, but it is changing, and it's not that I don't like it, but I'm worried where it's going to end up in 5 or 10 years.
All right. I think this is a good point to end it for today. So, Peter, any closing words?
Well, it was nice to do another discussion about, I think, important things. If you like music and the music industry, it's great to follow these things and have your own opinions. I hope you guys enjoyed it on the other end of the internet. As we said earlier, we are trying to get back on the grind and hopefully pump out some content. But from us for today, I think this was it. And go down in the comments, put your ideas down about the topics that we have talked about, and please feel free and comment on our previous videos. And from today, I've been Pete,
and I'm Gus,
and this is D2M.
Thank you very much,
and thanks for listening. Thank you to all of you who joined us on our mission today. Adios, amigos. See you on our next mission.